The sun had already started to drop low over the desert hills, painting the sky in deep orange and gold when Eli Turner rode back toward town. His horse's slow steps kicked up small clouds of dust along the dry road. Eli was a quiet man, known to most folks simply as the cowboy out by the creek. He didn't talk much and didn't care to. His past was something he never shared, but there was a heaviness in his eyes that made people think he had seen more than he wanted to remember. He lived alone, worked his ranch alone, and spoke to his horse more often than any living soul. That evening, Eli needed only a few things from the trading post: flour, salt, and some nails for the fence. He tied his horse outside and walked in, nodding to the shopkeeper who already knew what he wanted. While the man packed his supplies, Eli heard something unusual from the back alley behind the store. It was the sound of shouting, harsh and angry. Then came another sound, sharp and painful, that made Eli freeze for a second. He had heard it too many times before, a whip cutting through air and striking something or someone. He dropped the bag on the counter and stepped outside. Around the corner, a crowd of people had gathered near the post behind the old barn. Eli moved closer and saw the scene clearly now. A young native girl, her clothes torn and face covered with dust, was tied to a wooden post. A man in a dirty hat held a whip in one hand and shouted, saying she had stolen a piece of bread from his stall. The townsfolk stood watching, whispering, but no one stepped forward to stop him. Eli felt his chest tighten. The girl looked terrified. She couldn't have been older than 16, maybe 17 at most. Her arms were shaking and her eyes darted toward the crowd like a trapped animal. The man raised his whip again. Before Eli even thought about what he was doing, his boots were already moving. "That's enough," he said in a low, calm voice that carried over the noise. The man turned, surprised. Eli was standing there, tall and still, his hat shadowing his face. The wind blew softly across the dry ground, carrying the sound of his words. Everyone fell silent. "This isn't your business, Turner," the man barked. "She's a thief." Eli didn't answer. He took a step closer. The man raised the whip again, but before it could move, Eli's hand shot up and grabbed it. The crack of leather stopped in midair. The man tried to pull back, but Eli's grip didn't move an inch. "I said that's enough," Eli repeated quietly. The silence grew heavier. The sheriff came walking from across the street, his badge catching the fading light. "What's going on here?" he called. Eli turned toward him. "She's a child," he said simply. "You really gonna let a man whip a hungry girl over a loaf of bread?" The sheriff hesitated. Everyone knew Eli wasn't the kind of man to bluff. There was something cold and certain in his voice, something that made even the boldest men pause. Eli pulled his knife from his belt, sliced through the rope, and the girl fell forward, catching herself weakly. He bent down, helped her to her feet, and placed his coat over her shoulders. The crowd began to murmur. Some were angry, others unsure. The sheriff stepped closer, but Eli's look warned him not to interfere. He lifted the girl gently onto his horse and climbed up behind her. "She'll be fine now," Eli said. Then he rode out of town without looking back. The girl didn't say a word during the long ride. She kept her head low, clutching the edge of his coat. Her hair was tangled and her hands trembled. When the lights of the town faded behind them, the desert became silent except for the sound of hooves. After several miles, Eli stopped near his ranch, a small wooden cabin surrounded by fences and dry fields. He helped her down carefully and led her toward the porch. Inside, he poured her a cup of water and handed her a slice of bread. She stared at it for a moment before taking it with shaking fingers. He could see the fear in her eyes, but also pride. She didn't cry, didn't beg, and didn't speak. Finally, after a few minutes, she whispered a single word. "Ayanna," she said, touching her chest. "My name," Eli nodded. "I'm Eli." Then he pointed toward the barn. "You can sleep there tonight. It's warm and no one will bother you." She didn't answer, but her shoulders relaxed slightly. He gave her a blanket and watched as she walked toward the barn, her steps slow and uncertain. That night, Eli sat by the fire inside his cabin, staring into the flames. The night air was cool and the coyotes howled somewhere far away. He couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen, the way that crowd had just stood there. It reminded him too much of the past, of times when he had followed orders he didn't believe in, when people suffered and no one spoke up. Maybe that's why he acted today. Maybe it was his way of trying to make peace with the man he once was. He heard the barn door creak in the wind and wondered if the girl was asleep. She was probably terrified, alone, and unsure of what would happen next. He didn't know what to do for her beyond giving her a safe place for the night. Still, a part of him felt lighter than it had in years, like a burden he didn't know he was carrying had lifted just a little. As dawn began to break, Eli opened the cabin door. The cold morning light spilled across the ground. The barn door was open, but the girl was gone. The blanket he had given her was folded neatly on the hay, and beside it lay a single white feather. Eli picked it up, turning it in his fingers. He wasn't sure what it meant, but somehow it felt like a sign of thanks. He saddled his horse, went about his chores, and tried to put it out of his mind. Maybe she had gone back to her people. Maybe she had just disappeared into the wide, endless land. He told himself it was better that way. People like him didn't get involved. The world had its own way of taking care of things, or breaking them. That evening, as the sun fell once again behind the same red hills, Eli sat on the porch with his coffee. The wind had started to pick up, carrying the smell of dust and sagebrush. He was lost in thought when he heard it, a faint knock on the cabin door. He turned, half expecting the wind to have caused it, but then it came again. 3 soft knocks. He stood up and opened the door. There, standing in the fading light, was the same girl, Ayanna. Her face was clean now, her hair braided neatly, and though she looked tired, there was calm strength in her eyes. She held something small in her hands, wrapped in a cloth. Eli frowned slightly, surprised. "You shouldn't have come back," he said quietly. "It's not safe for you near town." Ayanna looked up at him and said in a soft, careful voice, "I come to pay you back." Eli blinked, unsure what she meant. "You don't owe me anything," he said. But she shook her head and stepped forward, placing the small bundle on his table. When she opened it, he saw beads, small stones of turquoise, and what looked like a hand-stitched piece of fabric with a tribal mark. She spoke slowly, choosing her words. "These are mine. My thanks." Eli stared at the bundle, then at her. He wanted to refuse, to tell her to keep it, but something in her expression stopped him. There was dignity in the way she stood, and he didn't want to take that away from her. So he nodded quietly. The evening light fell across both of them, and for a moment neither spoke. The desert outside was quiet, the world still. Eli felt something stir inside him. A strange peace, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of a bond that would change both their lives forever. Eli stood silent as the young native girl placed her small bundle on his table. The fire in the corner of the cabin flickered, casting soft shadows across her face. She looked calmer now, stronger somehow, but her dark eyes still held a quiet sadness. Eli didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to people coming to his door, much less offering him gifts. He scratched the back of his neck and glanced at the pouch she had brought, unsure how to respond. "You don't owe me anything," he said again gently. "You keep those. You might need them." Ayanna shook her head. "No," she said in a soft but firm voice. "You help me. I must give back." Her English was still broken, but her meaning was clear. She wasn't there out of fear or pity. She was there because her heart told her to be. Eli sighed and sat down at the table. "All right," he said quietly. "If it means that much to you, I'll accept it." He nodded once, not wanting to embarrass her. She smiled faintly, the first real smile he had seen on her face. For a moment it softened the hard lines of the day and made the small cabin feel warmer. He offered her some coffee, but she didn't drink it. Instead, she looked around the room curiously, at the old tools hanging on the wall, the single bed, the folded blanket on the chair, and the small Bible sitting near the window. "You live alone," she said slowly, more like a statement than a question. Eli nodded. "Been that way a long time," he replied. Outside, the wind started to blow harder, rattling the loose boards. "Storm's coming," Eli said as he looked toward the darkening sky. "You'd better stay here tonight. Roads will flood near the creek." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He made a place for her near the fire with an extra blanket and some bread. She thanked him in her language, a soft string of words he didn't understand but somehow felt the meaning of. That night, Eli sat by the window, listening to the storm. Rain came down in sheets, tapping against the roof. Ayanna was asleep near the fire, curled in the blanket, her breathing calm and even. He watched her for a while, realizing how strange it felt to have another person in the cabin again. It reminded him of a time long ago when his younger sister would visit before she passed away. He had forgotten how comforting it could be to share quiet with someone. By morning, the storm had passed. The land outside smelled fresh, the air clear and cool. Eli made breakfast, just eggs and coffee, and gave her a small plate. She thanked him again, still quiet but less shy than before. When he went out to check the fence, she followed him without being asked. To his surprise, she began to help. She fetched nails, held the wood in place, and even carried small tools. She wasn't afraid of work. Eli didn't stop her. He just smiled a little and let her continue. Over the next few days, she stayed on, saying little but working hard. She helped clean the barn, cooked small meals, and washed his clothes in the stream nearby. She even mended his torn gloves using thin strands of thread she carried in her small bag. When Eli asked why she was helping so much, she looked at him with serious eyes and said, "My people say, when someone saves your life, you must walk with them until your spirit says thank you." It wasn't about debt. It was about honor. Eli didn't argue. He just nodded. As the days passed, Eli began to notice things about her, how she hummed soft songs while working, how she always paused to listen when birds called, how she treated his horse with gentle hands as if speaking to it without words. Her calm presence began to change the ranch. The place that had once felt empty now carried the sounds of life again. One afternoon, while they repaired the corral fence, Eli asked about her family. She spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully. "My mother gone," she said softly. "My brother small. I look for food when men catch me. I take bread for him." Her voice trembled and she turned away quickly to hide the emotion in her face. Eli said nothing, but he felt something tighten in his chest. He understood hunger, loss, and guilt. "If I find your people," he said finally, "I'll help you get back to them." She looked at him then, her eyes wide with gratitude. That evening, when the sky turned red, they sat outside the cabin, watching the light fade over the hills. The wind was calm, carrying the scent of sage and rain. Ayanna sat with her knees drawn close, humming a song from her tribe. Eli listened quietly. The melody was soft and haunting, yet peaceful. "What's it mean?" he asked when she finished. She smiled faintly. "It is about home," she said. "It says the land remembers those who love it." Eli looked out toward the open fields and murmured, "Then the land must remember you." For the first time in many years, Eli found himself talking more, telling her stories about his younger days, about horses, and about how the desert could look different each season. She listened with attention, sometimes asking simple questions, sometimes only smiling. Each evening felt shorter than the last, and the silence between them grew comfortable, like old friends who didn't need many words. A week later, a rider came through with supplies and told Eli that a small group of native families had been seen camping near the river, looking for a lost girl. Ayanna's eyes lit up when she heard. "My people," she said with joy. But when Eli told her he would take her there tomorrow, her smile faded a little. "You do not want me to stay?" she asked quietly. Eli froze for a moment. He hadn't thought about that. He had just assumed she would go back, but hearing her say it made him realize how much her presence had come to mean to him. "You should be with your people," he said softly. "They've been worried for you." She looked down, then nodded slowly. "Yes, my people come first." But her voice was sad, and Eli noticed. The next morning, the air was cool and bright. Eli saddled his horse and Ayanna climbed up behind him. They rode for miles through the open land until they reached the edge of the river valley. There, among the trees, smoke rose from small campfires. Several figures appeared, and when they saw her, they called out her name. She slipped off the horse and ran toward them, her laughter echoing through the valley. Eli stayed seated, watching quietly as she was embraced by her people. For a long moment, he didn't move. Something warm and heavy settled in his chest, part pride, part sorrow. After some time, Ayanna returned to him. "They are my people," she said softly. "But you are my friend." She took a bracelet from her wrist, made of turquoise and leather, and tied it around the handle of his saddle. "For you, so the land remembers you too." Eli didn't know what to say. He only nodded and tipped his hat slightly, his throat tight with feeling. "Take care, Ayanna," he said. She smiled, then turned back toward the camp. Eli rode home alone that day. The desert was quiet, the sky wide and endless. When he reached his cabin, the place felt emptier than before. But something inside him had changed. The loneliness he had carried for years didn't feel as heavy now. He hung the turquoise bracelet on a nail by the door, where the morning sun could touch it each day. Whenever the wind blew across the plains, he thought of her song, the one about the land remembering. Years later, the people in town still told the story of how a cowboy had stopped a cruel act and saved a young girl. They didn't know what happened after, but Eli did. For him, that moment had given meaning to everything that came before, and peace to everything that followed. And sometimes when the wind carried the sound of distant singing, he would close his eyes and smile, knowing that somewhere out there, Ayana still remembered too.